Dragon Blood Chronicles 2 Betrayed, written by Avril Sabine. Dedication. For Mum, who is thankfully nothing like Bridget. Book description. When one of the few people Morgane trusts is taken from her, all she should be able to think of is revenge. Not the pain of losing them. As a gold dragon, she can't show weakness. That will get her killed. Is she more human than dragon, like her mother has always accused? When it comes to survival of the fittest, being compared to a human can make other dragons see you as an easy target. And that isn't something she's going to let happen. The only problem is, she has no idea how to prevent it. Chapter 1. Morgane followed Anya through the forest, her longbow in her left hand, her quiver and sheathed dagger at her right hip. Anya's slim figure slipped past bushes and trees, her body avoiding touching them and leaving signs of her passage behind. She carried the same weapons as Morgane, and her shirt, trousers and supple leather boots were the browns of the forest, her dark brown hair blending in equally as well. Morgane, who wore the same colored clothes, looked over her shoulder to check that Ellen followed. Ellen was similar in appearance and build to Anya. Although rather than the blue of Anya's eyes, Ellen's were brown, similar to Morgane's. Except Ellen didn't have the flecks of gold that were scattered throughout the brown of her eyes. Ellen and Anya were cousins, but similar enough in appearance they could have been sisters. Ellen grinned. Better watch where you're going. Facing forward, Morgane tried to avoid a branch. It caught on the brown leather scarf wrapped around her head. Her white blonde hair cascaded around her shoulders and down her back, dragged out of a twisted coil by the same branch. At Ellen's laughter, Anya stopped and faced them. She grinned. Better hide your hair before you become the prey. Ellen slung her longbow over her shoulder and took the scarf off the branch. Let me help you. We're too close to the village for you to leave your hair uncovered. She wrapped Morgane's hair around her head in a tight coil before fixing the scarf over it. Smiling, she tucked a loose strand beneath the thin, soft leather. There you go. Not even one of our hunters would be able to spot you now. Morgane couldn't help glancing in the direction of the village her friends came from. She saw only trees and bushes. Not a single hunter. She gestured in the opposite direction. We should probably separate here anyway. I need to head home. Anya slung her longbow over her shoulder and threw her arms around Morgane. Next time we should go for a month instead of only a week. A week isn't long enough. Her arms tightened around Morgane. You should have been a hunter. You'd have made a better hunter than a dragon. Morgane returned the hug, dreading the thought of facing her mother after being gone for a week. She also ignored the comment about being a hunter. She was a dragon. There were things about being a hunter she would have liked, but she'd never want to give up being a dragon to become one. And she told her friends that numerous times. Letting go of Anya, she stepped back. I might not be able to see you for a couple of weeks. She hadn't told either of them that she'd left without permission. Nor was she about to. It's the day of our birth tomorrow. Mine and Gwynnem's. She grinned at the thought of her twin brother, and the effort he'd gone to in helping her sneak out of the castle. He didn't think she should spend time with hunters, but that didn't stop him from helping her. I'm sure there are things I'll need to catch up on after being away for so long. Anya looked over Morgane's shoulder, in the direction of the castle. What are they like? Celebrations at the castle. Do the rest of the dragons kill young villagers and drink their blood from gold goblets? Morgane laughed. Of course they don't. Are you sure you didn't make that up? Or the rest of the rumors you tell me about? Anya shared a look with Ellen, who shrugged. Morgane looked from one to the other. What is it? Ellen shook her head, hugging her tightly before stepping back. Nothing. Enjoy your celebrations tomorrow. If you were from our village, there'd be no celebrations. Not until you returned from the sacred waters in the mountains. Even then there might not be any celebrations, Anya said flatly. Elin draped an arm around Anya's shoulders. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have mentioned. Anya interrupted Elin. I have to get over it sometime. I'm confronted with magic nearly every moment of the day. Except this past week, Elin said softly. Morgane wished she could say something to cheer Anya. But there was nothing she could say. How did you comfort someone who faced a life without magic, when it was such an integral part of their society? A sound had the three of them facing the direction of the village. Relief at seeing a deer caused them to laugh softly. The laughter faded when an arrow struck the deer, dropping it to the ground. Anya took a step towards Morgane, turning her to face the direction of the castle. Go. If they see you. She let her warning trail off. With one last glance over her shoulder, Morgane ran in the direction of the castle, snatching her scarf from a branch as it was again tugged from her hair. She shoved it in her belt pouch, not slowing her pace. The trees pressed in too close for her to shapeshift. Not that she'd consider changing into her dragon form, to fly the rest of the way to the castle. The less attention she drew to herself returning home, the better. If she was lucky, she'd manage to sneak inside and find her brother, so she could learn when their mother had discovered she was missing. And make sure their stories matched. Who knew what he'd come up with in his efforts to keep their mother from learning when she'd left, and where she'd gone. She doubted Gwynam would have been able to hide the fact for more than a day or two. A soft sound had her dodging to the side, and she glanced at an arrow that embedded itself in a tree in front of her. Straining her ears, she tried to hear who followed. The myriad sounds of the forest were loud when she focused. Creatures scurrying about, larger creatures fleeing the area and birds taking flight. Yet she couldn't hear the one who hunted her. She breathed in deep, trying to catch their scent. A mixture of smells assaulted her. Nearby was death, overpowering the sweet smells released by the plants her feet crushed as she ran across them. Another soft sound had her dodging in the other direction. The sound of an arrow impaling a tree had her glancing over her shoulder. There was nothing. No movement, no visible hunter. Not that she'd expected to see them. With their magic to keep them silent and their ability to slip unnoticed through the forest, hunters could hide in plain sight. Even those not using magic to hide themselves were nearly impossible to find. She slipped around a broad tree, hearing an arrow embed itself in the wood on the other side of the trunk. Sinking low to the ground, she moved slowly towards a shrub. She forced her breathing to slow and strained her ears for the slightest of sounds. Crouching behind the shrub, she heard it. Not the hunter. No, the creatures scurrying out of the way. Placing her bow on the ground beside her, she wrapped her hair around her head, hiding the bright strands beneath the scarf she took from her belt pouch. She felt along the edges, making sure every strand was hidden. Again she tried to hear where the hunter might be. Nothing. Not the whisper of sound, not something cracking beneath a footstep, or even the whistle of an arrow through the air. There was silence. An unnatural silence, as not even the small creatures remained nearby. Holding her breath, she peered around the edge of the shrub. Scanning the area, she looked for depressions in the ground where a hidden hunter might be standing. She'd practiced tracking Ellen. Her friend wasn't officially a hunter. Hadn't yet turned 18 and visited the sacred waters in the mountains. But she would gain that status when she made the journey. And as she practiced and her magic improved, she'd be able to bend the light around her for greater periods of time to remain hidden for longer than what she was currently capable of. A hunter appeared in front of Morgane, his bow drawn back, an arrow aimed at her. She recognized him instantly. Ellen's brother. Jorn. She froze, staring into the dark brown eyes, so similar to his sister's. His hair, a slightly darker shade to Ellen's, fell in tousled waves around his face. He wore similar clothes to hers, forest browns, and had a quiver of arrows and a sheath dagger at his right hip, belt pouch on his left, and supple leather boots on his feet. He had the typical close-cropped beard that circled his mouth and chin and went along his jawline, as many of the males in the village wore. She tensed, ready for him to let go of the string. Yet he continued to stand in front of her. What was he waiting for? Then she realized. For his magic to allow him to go invisible again. Wrapping a hand around her bow that rested on the ground, she launched herself towards him, grabbing the arrow from the air as he let go of the string. Dropping the arrow, she threw herself at him, changing enough to allow claws to puncture his flesh. The sharp scent of blood filled her senses. Releasing him, she raced through the forest, bringing her fingers to her lips, licking the blood from them, savoring and learning all she could of him. Taste, scent, form, mind, location. Not as efficient as the mage trackers Gilda had told her about, but more than sufficient for what she needed. There was no way he'd be able to hide from her now. She could feel the tug of him behind her, the sense of him. She veered away. He followed. The distance between them decreased. Slipping her bow across her head and shoulder, she positioned it on her back, and leapt for the branch of a nearby tree, scurrying up it. She sensed him slow. He'd lost her. A smile slowly formed as she sensed him below. Invisible. He walked around the tree, slight depressions in the ground giving him away now she knew where he was. There was only silence from his location. Complete and utter silence. A sound in the distance caught her attention. A sound in the direction of the castle. He was too close to where her mother's warriors patrolled. And he was only a hunter, didn't have her sense of smell and hearing. One hunter didn't stand a chance against 5 dragon warriors. Even warriors that weren't gold. Maybe an older hunter's magic would be powerful enough to take on 5 dragons, but not the magic of a 20-year-old. Jorn appeared below her, scanning the area as he moved slowly around the tree, frowning. She couldn't resist a smile. It faded as quickly as it had appeared. If it wasn't for the warriors headed towards them, she could have outweighted him. If she stayed in the tree, Jorn was as good as dead. There was no way she could face Ellen if she sat by and watched Ellen's brother killed. If she called down and warned him, the warriors would hear. There was even a chance they'd hear if she dropped down in front of him and whispered a warning in his ear. They were close. Too close. Jorn turned in the direction of the warriors. He took a step towards them. Had he heard something? She didn't know and couldn't risk him heading that way thinking it was her. There was only one thing she could do. And it should work. Weren't the villagers human, like the servants her grandfather had left here with her mother? Forming claws, she pierced the skin of her wrist before leaping softly to the ground below. Straightening, she knocked the arrow from Jorn's hand when he spun to face her, pressing the blood on her fingers against his lips. Staggering back, he wiped a hand across his mouth. She grinned. His action was too late. Some of her blood had already entered his mouth. Spinning, she raced through the forest, sensing him follow. Behind him, she heard the warriors veer in their direction. Jorn. She sent her thoughts into his mind, the link opened by his consumption of her blood. Get out of my head. Dragon. 5 warriors chase you. Impossible. They can't hear me. Or see me. But they can hear me. He didn't answer her, and it was only that she could sense he followed, that she knew he was behind her. Jorn. Go home. I'll go home if you stay away from my sister. Laughter nearly escaped. This is for her sake, I warn you. Do you think she'd want you killed? She says you're her friend. Not much of a friend if you're willing to let her be ostracized from the village, and unable to make the journey to the sacred waters." His words caused her to stumble. "What do you mean?" There was a moment of silence before Jorn replied. "I should have known she wouldn't have told you." She entered a clearing, large enough she'd be able to shapeshift. She didn't slow her pace. "Then how about you tell me?" She sensed him enter the clearing. Well over halfway across it, she stopped and turned to face him. Once more he was invisible. She heard the arrow whistle through the air before she saw it, sidestepping before it could strike her. "Show yourself." She latched the top of her specially designed quiver into place. "If you don't, I could hurt you." Her clothes and weapons might look like those of the villagers, but they were different. Made from dragon leather. As was her scarf, which had been made from the thinnest of leather. Jorn appeared, his bow drawn back, an arrow pointed at her again. "Not before I can hurt you." He let go of the string and the arrow flew towards her.